Good morning, British literature students, and welcome to what I guess is technically week 2, even though this is the first full week of our semester. This week we're going to look at what is known as the Lake Poets, and this is going to be the beginnings of something known as the Romantic movement. So, what I'm going to have you do, and I'm going to have you doing this pretty much for the next several weeks, is reading the assignments and doing some postings in the discussion board. Now, this week there's only one posting, but it's, and I'll try to keep it down to one posting just about every week, although some weeks that will be impossible because the two authors or the three authors or whatever that we're looking at aren't really related in any way. So I won't be able to tie them together into a single posting. But this week I can do that because we've got two guys who were best friends for a little while. Now they did have a falling out at one point, and that lasted for a few years, but they were best friends at one time, and this is William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge. These guys put together a book called Lyrical Ballads, and Lyrical Ballads would change poetry, and it was a groundbreaking book in ways that even Wordsworth and Coleridge probably couldn't have imagined when they released it. Now, we'll talk about what to do with postings in a minute, but let's talk about Wordsworth and Coleridge for a minute. The thing to remember with Wordsworth and Coleridge is that Lyrical Ballads was an experiment. It was an experiment to see if their brand of poetry could work. Because at the time Lyrical Ballads was published in 1795, they were in the middle of something known as the Age of Reason, also known as the Enlightenment, where logic could solve every problem, and you just took emotion out of it. A lot of the major players in the Enlightenment were people like Alexander Pope, Jonathan Swift, Samuel Johnson. There were several poets who thought that poetry was supposed to have a larger purpose, and it was supposed to be about kings and gods and warriors and heroes, and that it was supposed to be written in an elevated language where you would use big words in order to get the point across. Wordsworth and Coleridge did not necessarily agree with that. In fact, they totally disagreed with that. So, what you're going to read, for Wordsworth, you're going to read two portions of the prelude to Lyrical Ballads. Now, if you notice when you open the book that the preface is much larger than what I've got you reading. I've only got you reading the final two sections of that. I don't have you reading the whole prelude. I've only got you reading, I think it's about 10 pages or so of it. Let's see. It is 5 there. Oh, it's only 5 pages. So 5 or 6 pages of the prelude is all I got you reading out of that whole big part. So make sure you confine your reading to that. Then you've got a little poem by Wordsworth called We Are Seven, which is kind of a way to illustrate Wordsworth's poetic philosophies in poem form. And then you've got Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rime in the Ancient Mariner, which is a little bit different from Wordsworth, but it's still also very different from the Age of Reason in several ways. So, what you're going to do is you're going to read these things, and then you're going to make a posting in the discussion board. Now, bear in mind that when Wordsworth and Coleridge released Lyrical Ballads in 1795, and then they would do several different editions after that. In fact, the prelude didn't appear until the second edition. This was an experiment. They were trying to break new ground. They didn't know whether this book, Lyrical Ballads, was going to be a major success or a major flop. It could have been either one. Now, luckily for Wordsworth and Coleridge, and luckily for us today, the book was a major success. But what Coleridge is going to say in poetry is that emotion does play a role in poetry. In fact, that whole Recollections and Tranquility part is about the role that emotion plays, and how a poet experiences great emotion and then must put it down in poetic form. But he doesn't write the poetry while he's expressing it. He actually writes it while he reflects back on it and remembers what he felt. They're going to say that poetry should be written in a common language spoken by the common man. You should not use 5-syllable words when a one or 2-syllable word will work just fine. And they say that poetry should be about ordinary life and about ordinary people. It doesn't have to be about Odysseus. It doesn't have to be about Zeus. It can be about, as we see with Wordsworth's little cottage girl and We Are Seven, it can be about a little girl that lives in a cottage. Somebody as simple as that. Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner does have supernatural elements in it, but it's still just one crazy old sailor and a wedding guest who has to hear his story. So, even though they're two completely different poems, they're also both different from what Pope or what Swift or somebody like that would have read. So, bear those things in mind as you actually read these pieces. Now, the postings. What do you do for the postings? Very simple. If you go into our D2L homepage, there is a folder or module on that left-hand side. You see the syllabus is at the top. The very next thing is it's assignments. Go to that assignments folder, and the very first handout in there says weekly discussion postings online. Those are the instructions you'll need to follow in order to do well on these postings. It spells out everything I'm looking for in there. You're going to need a couple of paragraphs. You're going to need to have some sort of a thesis you're trying to prove, which is basically usually going to be the answer to the question I'm asking. You're going to need to be grammatically sound. You're going to need to have direct quotes in there. Now, there is also in the, let me see which folder is that. I think it's the MLA format. Yes, in the MLA format, there's also a folder on how to quote poetry correctly. In fact, it's titled Quoting Poetry. Refer to that, because in 1102 you probably wrote a poetry paper, but maybe you've forgotten because we've had Christmas break and everything since then, how to properly quote poetry. So, you're going to actually open that up and quote your poetry correctly in MLA format, or else I will take points off. So my expectations are in those two handouts. Take the time to open them, take the time to refer to them as you write your postings, and you should do just fine. If you give me a summary of something, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a low grade. So, take the time with these postings and do them right, so that way you can get high scores. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me, or feel free to call me on my office phone during office hours, or what you can do if you're on campus, let's say you're taking some classes on campus, but for whatever reason took my class online, you can drop by my office. I would love to meet you. Stop by. Hi, Mr. Smith. My name is Shane, and I am a student in your British literature course. And I'll be shaking your hand, and I'll say, hey, it's nice to meet you. And it'll be nice to be able to put a face to the name. And also, if you're struggling with these postings, or you struggle with the research paper later, you can come by my office during my office hours, and I can help you with that. So, just because this is an online class doesn't mean that we have to be isolated. Now, if you live outside of Albany, obviously you can't drop in. But still, there may be times when you send me an email, and I'll look at it, and I'll realize that I would spend an hour typing a response, and I'll just say, call me tomorrow during my office hours. And I may remind you what those are. And then we can have a little 5 or 10 minute phone conversation, instead of me spending an hour writing this great big long email, which you're then going to send another email back to me and say, I don't understand, in which I'm going to have to try to explain again. So, that's it for this week. We've got the Lake Poets. We've got Wordsworth and Coleridge. I think you're going to enjoy them, and I think this is going to be a really good start to our semester as we go through this journey of British literature.